Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Welcome to the breakout session on financing artificial intelligence innovation. I'm glad to see so many of you joining, so please keep coming. Thank you also to our panelists for having accepted to take part in this discussion. I'll tell you now that it's going to be looking promising. Over the past 2 days, we've heard debate on global governance, on AI, standardization, new regulation, and fundamental rights. The focus of the next hour is discussing and better understanding the financing opportunities, but also the challenges of financing artificial intelligence. What has worked well in the past and what can we expect from the future in terms of financial instruments? How can we foster innovation, but at the same time ensure the respect of fundamental rights? What is the best way to enhance cooperation across the EU member states? On all these questions and much more, we will be hearing from people who work on these issues on a daily basis. Just before I introduce you to our panelists, let me inform you that if I've done my job well enough, we'll have about 5 to 10 minutes left right at the end for some Q&A session. So after the wrap up, you will see in screen a QR code leading you to Slido, where you will have the opportunity to address your questions to the panelists. Now, yes, please let me introduce you to our experts joining today from Luxembourg, Germany, Croatia, and France, and representing national and European investment bodies, SMEs, startups, and venture capital funds. We have many and exciting topics to cover. I may remind the speakers, please, to make use of no more than 3 minutes for each round of questions. Let me first introduce you, please, to Shiva Dustard. Shiva, she has 25 years of experience in the financial industry, is currently heading the Innovation Finance Advisory Division in the IB, which has the task to provide advisory services, access to finance advice to public and private organizations, and they are in charge of performing market studies and developing financial instruments to meet the financing needs of the market. We also have with us Jean-David Malo. Jean-David is the director of the Executive Agency for the European Innovation Council and SMEs, the agency called EISMEA. He has been involved in key initiatives like the Venture EU initiative and the research dimension of the former FC, the Juncker plan. We also have with us Renaud Champion. Renaud, he is the founder and CEO of Primnext, a company specializing in valuing disruptive technologies, scaling up companies operating in robotics and artificial intelligence, and guiding organizations in the AI transformation. We also have with us Nicole Wagner. She is the co-founder and CEO of Merantix Labs, a leading AI solution firm. She's also a member of the management board of the first AI venture studio based in Berlin. Also with us, Heidi Sejan. She is co-founder and CEO of her newest venture, AI startup called IRT, that enables companies to easily and quickly implement and use the power of artificial intelligence on all of their data. And last but not least, we have Elad Vervin with us joining from Berlin. He is a computer scientist specializing in algorithms and machine learning. Elad co-founded some time ago Lunar Ventures, a European seed startup venture capital fund backed by Innofin AI and a blockchain pilot. So warm welcome to all of you. Looking forward to our discussion this hour. We have 1 hour, so let's get started. The EIB and Oliver Wyman, Shiva, have recently published the study on the global AI and blockchain landscape. The study addresses, amongst other topics, the EU positioning of these technologies vis-a-vis international geographies, and it clearly identifies market gaps in terms of debt and equity financing. In view of that, Shiva, can you please tell us what are the findings of the study, and in particular those market failures and barriers that you have identified? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minerva, and thanks to the organizers. Indeed, we published our study in June this year. It was a study commissioned by the European Commission, DG RTD and DG Connect. So it's nice to have Jean-David Malo, who is our godfather there on this panel. Now, let me go straight into the findings. So what we identified, we looked at it from 4 vantage points: from a demand side, supply side of financing, from a market infrastructure and ecosystem perspective. Now, the situation in Europe is as follows. There is generally low investment volume of financing. And to put it very much in numbers, so we're talking roughly in 2019, 25 billion of investment in AI and blockchain technologies. I should add that we have looked at both of those technologies. Of the 25 billion globally, unfortunately, Europe's share is only at 7% compared to roughly 64% in the US and 16% out of China. Now, so this 7% translates roughly into 1.75 billion euros. When we look at sort of from an annual investment gap perspective, we're roughly coming up to a number of 10 billion. And when we look further deeper into it, we would sort of say 80-20 split between AI and blockchain, and a real need for the later stage investments, sort of the scale up, which is a very common issue in Europe when we look at innovation. So nothing new here. In terms of, again, looking at the supply side, so that from a supply of financing, we also are dealing with an investor community that is perhaps less specialized and is looking currently at this with limited appetite, which is a bit odd given that, you know, AI is all over the place, one of the most transformative and potentially disruptive technologies. But again, looking at it from a broader investor perspective, that's how it is. Now, on the demand side, and this is a demand for financing, in Europe, we're looking at a rather low R&D investment environment, which is perhaps also explained by the fact that, of course, all the large tech companies that are making these heavy investments, unfortunately, are not in Europe. And this, of course, creates some structural issues. There is, of course, also the whole, and I know this is widely discussed, the whole digital market, the lack of maybe enough regulation or and enough data to kind of further enhance the demand. Then very briefly on the market infrastructure side, this is where perhaps, you know, we need to ensure that there is much better matching happening between the actual, you know, companies that are looking for financing and those that are supplying. But of course, the broader digital infrastructure that needs to be put in place to anyway enable a lot of these technologies. And then finally, and this is a classic that comes out, unfortunately, in every one of our studies, the innovation ecosystem in Europe is considered to be rather fragmented when it comes to financing. And I think here we have a really unique opportunity, especially on the AI front, to bring all of these various, both at the EU level, the member states together, but also the various financings that we will hear about in this panel closer together. And that's where we hope, certainly from an EIB advisory perspective, to play a role. So back to you.
Thank you, Shiva. Looking at Jean-David Malo now, Jean-David, the task force, the EIC task force has worked extensively on finding those barriers for innovation in the EU. 3 major bottlenecks or action points have been identified: funding, innovation performance, and ecosystem. What's holding back European innovation and innovative startups and SMEs in this valley of debt? What are the barriers in the funding that you see?
Thanks a lot, and good morning to everybody, and thanks to the organizer for the opportunity of this exchange of views. I would complement a little bit, in fact, a lot of what was already said by Shiva. In Europe, we have a particular paradox. It's true globally, but it's true in particular for the AI area. I mean, we have a strong research performance It's absolutely clear. It's demonstrated also in the context of the artificial intelligence. I mean, we have the largest talent pool of AI researchers in the world. We have a third more than the US. We have the doubles and what you can find in China. We have more publication. We are leading the number of high-level publications in the last 2 decades. So, I mean, we have a strong knowledge background, let's say, but we remain with this paradox to be able to translate this into innovation. And it's even more true, and it is the case for AI regarding breakthrough or deep tech oriented innovations that are able to create these new markets that we have in front of us. And in particular, we have 2 value of this. In fact, we have more than 2, but we have in particular 2 when you look at the early stage. First, the transition between lab and enterprise, because we have this pool, but we have not necessarily the capacity, or we have not yet found the relevant path in order to ease, in fact, this transfer from lab to enterprise. And second, in the very early stage of the life of some startups, that we have in Europe, and by the way, we have a lot of startups that are promising in Europe. We are not yet able to provide them in the very first year of their growth with the necessary means in order to scale up very quickly. This is due to a number of factors. I mean, a number of them were already quoted by Shiva. I mean, the situation of our VC market, where we have in reality smaller VC funds, and therefore the granularity of their portfolio is such that they are not necessarily able to provide and to take the necessary risks that are needed, in particular for this type of companies. And on top of this, we remain also, as Shiva mentioned it, with a fragmented innovation ecosystem. You could tell me that you have also a fragmented innovation ecosystem in the US, and this is true. But the main difference there is that despite the fact that you have this kind of fragmentation, the connectedness that exists in the US is not existing really in Europe. And there we have still a lot of work to do in order to ensure that the various actors at regional, national level, EU level are working together to create, in fact, in all our regions, for all our talents, in fact, the capacity to have access to the means that exist, because means exist. Liquidity exists. The key question is how to connect all of this in order to deliver, because we are clearly in a race. Shiva mentioned, in fact, the investments that are made by a huge enterprise, but also with the support of leading countries. And if we want to maintain, in fact, our position, if we want to be among the leaders of tomorrow, I mean, we have certainly to review the way we provide this type of support. And this was one of the raison d'etre, as you know, Minerva, of the reflections that we had initially under the leadership of Commissioner Moedas, now with Commissioner Gabriel, in the context of the IC task force, but a bit later today, we will come in on some of the solutions that we are ready to provide.
Thank you, Jean-David. Looking at Renault now, Renault, you've been through this as an entrepreneur, CEO of a consulting firm working in these disruptive technologies. AI has a gigantic innovation potential for many sectors across the EU, many economies. This is also the main argument of your book, Artificial Intelligence and Sustainable Value Creation. In which sectors there is the highest value generation potential? And is, in your view, the funding easily accessible for innovators? Are we going from the valley of death to the opportunities that we have in this sector? Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Minerva. Hello, everyone. So if I look at AI from a broader perspective, there is, I think, there are 3 main sectors where AI, data, and robotics have the most value creation potential. I would say that the first one is industrial automation and supply chain management. So this goes from manufacturing to agriculture, but also covers logistics, inspection, maintenance. So it's a pretty broad sector. in these sectors, AI has a potential to rethink production processes in factories, in warehouses, and outside in the field. So it's pretty much developed today already in Europe, and there is a huge scale-up effect to be done there. The second sector would be, I guess, mobility and smart cities. And in this sector, I refer to new ways to consider transportation, both personal and professional, and how urban infrastructures will have to adapt. It, of course, also covers the question of energy management and sustainability. And I would say that the third sector that is really a source of value creation, thanks to AI, is healthcare. Here I refer, of course, to prevention and diagnosis, but also to surgery and rehabilitation. AI can help us in this sector look at the patient in a very holistic way. And in all those three sectors, I think there are already a large variety of funding tools available, both from public and private institutions. But as was mentioned before, those tools are very segmented. I mean, you have one kind of tool for SME, one kind of tool for large companies. You have one kind of tool or funding scheme for machine learning, a different one for robotics, and another one again for data. But when dealing with AI globally, we need to unify this because we face a very diverse panel of stakeholders who need to meet, to interconnect, and to work in a very transversal manner. So funding will be successful in those sectors if we build the bridges between these stakeholders, and if we are at the crossroads of interdependent technologies, again, like AI, data, and robotics, but also across the different frontiers with nations who have different interests. There are tools today in Europe, like the Digital Innovation Hub networks, that are going in the right direction, but we need to scale this up. We need to go one step further, and those networks need to be more mature. So there are possibilities available, but we need to interconnect them. And finally, I'd like to also add that in Europe, all our companies are being impacted by AI in almost every of their business functions, regardless of their sector of activity and their nature. It's true for human resources, marketing, finance, and so on. And here, I would say that the funding challenge is to make sure that all those companies in Europe, regardless of their size and activity, can afford AI-based services and products. It's not always possible because of the lack of awareness, the cost of the technologies, and the practical implementation of such solutions in the production process. So the questions of procurement and practical implementation of the AI transformation are key, especially for SME. But hopefully it's about to be addressed.
Thank you very much, Renaud. Looking into now the next speaker, Nicole. Nicole, you are doing this on a daily basis, right? Amongst other goals, Merantix Labs has created a fund deck to support the new ventures financing. So, as a CEO and also as a tech optimist, as you describe yourself, an advisor to these entrepreneurs, how could you summarize business and startup struggles in securing this financing for AI, especially in the ideation, in the incubation phases, the first phases of the ventures?
Yeah, thank you very much, and hello to everybody. Let me build on a few things. So, from our personal journey at Merantix, we, for example, as a venture studio, so the problem that was brought up by Jean David about the transfer between research to actual commercialization being not smooth enough. That's a real problem. And there are actually successful models in the US that are venture studios that try to address this. We in AI like to call this, for example, the dual PhD problem. You need a really smart girl in biochemistry and a really smart girl in AI to create a really powerful solution in the space. How are they going to meet? How are they going to ideate together? One of the solutions would be an AI venture studio like ourselves. We see other examples. Let me just call out ETH AI Center in Zurich, which is basically creating a cross-functional department where they're bringing all AI researchers to one space. But that's a matter of cross-fertilization, and we need financing structures that allow this. Back to my personal story at Merantix. We were looking for funding from the great funding vehicle of the European Investment Fund. We did not get it because a venture studio is technically a fund, but looks too different to a fund. Maybe be open to new models for Merantic's sake, for other people's sake who are trying to create the same thing. I know of many venture studios who are trying to create the same thing to have impact in southern Italy or Greece or in other places. And it's a model that is well established in the US for different business models, number one. I think the second problem is that we're thinking of it often as grant financing in the EU. And I want to advocate for more, all of you, you're decision makers in the public space, you can become a client of a startup. You can help commercialization and commercial traction and product market fit by becoming users and clients. We don't want free money. We want sustainable business models that make sense long-term. So for me, it is much more valuable to get a client than to get free money and ideate around something that I think might be a good fit. But I have to then find out later with a real client if somebody actually wants to buy this. This is not the same. I'm simplifying, and I know there are some areas, and Renaud mentioned some of them in the healthcare space, they have much longer development cycles. It's going to be much harder to see this traction early on. But if you're asking me for some simple things, that would be a really simple thing. And you could help a lot of clients, a lot of startups in the space, wherever you could be a client. I think another topic is actually that we haven't mentioned yet is diversity. I think we're focusing a lot on, look at me, think about the majority of tech entrepreneurs in Europe. I think we are focusing a lot on markets that we've been used to for decades. We have new emerging markets and consumer needs, and especially in the realm of AI, healthcare, bias, all these kind of things play a role. You have public funding available, you can be a client. Put it also in diverse founders, in diverse teams that will explore those underserved markets effectively, that knows those users, that know those problems, and will deal with it. Oh, I have so many points here. Another point, make it more easy for institutional investors like pension funds to invest in funds like us. It's too easy to buy money market fund with sovereign debt, and that's all risk-free. We need the risk premium to be reflective of the actual risk an investment carries. How you evaluate the risk of sovereign debt is a whole other discussion, but just make it easier for professional investors, for institutional investors that are state-owned or partly state or whatever to do this. I will just make a full stop here. We have more time for discussion later. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Taking some notes and some takeaways already. Homework to do. Let me now pass on the floor to Heidi. Heidi, she is the CEO of ART. ART is a startup that enables companies from various industries to easily and quickly implement these technologies and use the power of AI on their data. As a CEO, Heidi, what are the main challenges that startups are facing in this implementation, especially in the early stages before they get to the revenue phase?
Thank you, Minerva, and hi to everyone. Good afternoon. Greetings from Croatia. So also, I'm a co-founder and the CEO of Startup, but I also have the honor and the privilege to be part of the Innovation Ecosystems Leaders Group, which gathers the startup ecosystem representatives of all member states. And it is a group that was initiated by the Commissioner Gabriel to really figure out what are the pain points of startups so that Europe can really become a global powerhouse for startups and to create many more unicorns that we have now. And we did create an entire action plan with 21 points, but I dare say that two main pain points would be talent and of course, access to financing. That's why we're here talking. So when we're talking about talent, if we presume that we have enough talent around the world, it's also very important to figure out how to attract that talent and how to retain it. And especially if you're a startup that you need experts in new technologies such as AI, then you need to figure out how to finance those experts. And normally startups don't have a lot of money at the beginning, so they offer lower salaries or lower packages, but they can offer often something that maybe larger companies don't, and that is the ownership of the startup. Unfortunately, Europe has not really solved the problem of employee stock options properly, and that is also one of the big reasons that startups are leaving Europe, leaving the EU, and going to the US. So we really need a plan that is not just, nice words on paper to check the box and not really being used by startup communities. So that is definitely one thing that needs to be fixed. When it comes to financing, we've heard already a lot of things. I would mention, so one thing that is beautiful with the EU, that we have a lot of funds and we have those grants, but as Nicole said, we don't really want free money if we're really keen on developing a business model that is viable, that can be scalable, and go global. And also one of the things when it comes to innovation is that you often don't know what will happen. So you start with one idea, but it's not necessary that that idea is going to be the end result. And when it comes to grants, sometimes they can be very limiting and very restricting into, they tell us exactly what we need to invest in, and maybe that is not something that we actually need, and that's going to bring a scalable business and a global business at the end. And when it comes to financing, especially the earliest stages, if we're talking about, for example, angel investors, that is something that is also not really developed in Europe. But if we look at the example of the UK, which has kind of solved this problem with their SEIS scheme, it's obviously working and they're doing something right, because if you look at Europe, UK has the highest number of unicorns. And unfortunately, they're not part of the EU anymore, so we cannot count those unicorns in. But that really works because it takes the risk off of those private investors that are really investing at those earliest stages of startups that are the riskiest. When it comes to later stages, one of the problems when it comes to VCs, for example, in Europe is, again, the risk taking. So the adage goes that in the US, they invest in you to become successful. In Europe, they invest in you when you become successful. And unfortunately, that is true. And it goes, especially when you're trying to get investment and trying to get a good valuation. So also there is a kind of a saying in the startup community that if you're raising in Europe, you get one valuation, you go to UK, you add another zero. If you go to US, you add another zero to your valuation. So you get good investment with a good valuation. So that is, again, something that really we need to figure out how to work on and how to fix. So those are my 2 cents. I will stop now.
Thank you very much, Heidi. Looking at Elad, you are a co-founder of Lunar Ventures, a fund backed by the IF. The fund invests in startups with high innovation potential, and it's truly specific in this sector. Tell us a bit about, what has been your experience with financing AI and related technologies. What are the main challenges ahead of us? Tell us a bit about, what you see on a daily basis in your deal sourcing, deal screening, please. Floor is yours.
Absolutely. So thank you for having me. Yes, we invest in computer science startups that take big technical risk, anything in pre-seed and seed and stages. And there's been a lot of talk about how the problem is the investors, or it wasn't explicit. I'll make it explicit. I think the problem with innovation in AI, in blockchain, in computer science in Europe is the investors, is the VC ecosystem. And I'll tell you, and many VCs that I talk to agree with me, and let me explain why. So first of all, as Jean-David said, Europe has massive amounts of talent. There's 2x per capita researchers than in the US. I talk to amazing researchers and entrepreneurs and founders from computer science backgrounds all day long, and they are starting amazing companies. And people, there are many, many successful European startups, and sadly, most of them are known as US startups because they start here by European talent, by smart people educated in Europe and working with European teams, and they either start in the US from day one or they move there. And the reason, I believe, the reason they move there is throughout the value chain, but I think the biggest problem is investing in them in the ideation stage, let's call it pre-seed and seed. And the reason that, and I think specifically there's talent, there's support, there's hiring. Yes, stock options are a problem, but all of this is really small compared to the problem that European VCs that are positioned to invest in startups don't know much about computer science and don't know much about machine learning. And it's not their fault, it's just because of how VCs are selected, are self-selected, are financed. They want to know more, but there is no path. So I believe that if you're going to invest in technology, AI, computer science, you need to have computer scientists on board. And the problem is there's no clear path for computer scientists to get into VC, and there's no clear path for computer science-based VCs to get funded. We got funded by EAF and Innofin and by many private entities, and I'm super glad about that. And for my personal benefit, it's better to not fund any of my competitors, please. But for the benefit of Europe, and Europe can totally win in this space, you need a much stronger VC ecosystem. And I'll tell you a lot about how I believe this should be, this can be achieved. But the bottom line is direct more funding towards under $100 million VC funds into small micro VCs, because the larger VCs are just not suitable for investing in the pre-seed and seed stages in these startups. And I'll say more about that in the second question.
Super. Thanks so much, Elad. So we talked about the past and the present. Let's try and focus a bit more on the future. In light of our debate today and the work all your organizations are doing, how to move from ambition to action, and how can multilateral collaboration be beneficial in this respect. I'm looking now to Shiva. Shiva, building on the results and recommendations of your study on market failures and barriers, how is the EIB group planning to move forward?
Yes, no, thank you very much, Minerva. Let me perhaps, just to make it also a bit more interactive, maybe respond to some very pertinent, good suggestions that were made by various colleagues on the panel, because they feed into the recommendations. So Renaud, I think Renaud's comment about the applications actually show that Europe can really gain some major competitive advantage on the industrial B2B activities with the right enabling regulatory environment and the financing of this technology. So I really would like to perhaps maybe start this answer with a positive spin, because I gave a rather grim picture, but really also to make give ourselves a good reality check on the state of play. So there is a huge opportunity, and I think Europe can really make a difference here and hopefully catch up and really be part of this race. Now, Nicola, you made some very pertinent points which are picked up in many of our studies on, if I understood you correctly, on the innovative, the power of innovative procurement. You want the public sector as your customer, as your client, and there is such a powerful role if we also again took a more European procurement approach. We start with the vaccine, so it can happen. If we took a more holistic approach to procurement, you would have clients, and that in itself can be quite market creating, and has a powerful tool. So I really hope that this is something that we take much closer to heart, because it's not just always grants or even equity, but also creating these market conditions. The other very important point you made is, and I think those of you who know me, I'm very much in, I see huge links between AI and also diversity and a gender lens. I think this is, self-evident. But to your point about ensuring that the investments go into diverse teams who then have that lens when they make their investments is so absolutely critical. And with that, perhaps that growth mindset that the new funds that will actually have these technologies of AI, blockchain, and all these disruptive things. Maybe we need to disrupt a bit our own mindset, how we enter the structure, because maybe the old fund structures are no longer the right ones. So I would very much in my role as advisory always advocate for a growth mindset on those things. Now, maybe just, however, to answer Minerva's question, which is very important. So when we are looking at now the issues, perhaps we take a holistic perspective as the EIB group, and let me just give 4 quick points. There's perhaps the advisory side, maybe the upstream side, where, as you have heard, we are providing advisory support both to companies, governments in the use of technologies, and how to better access this perhaps fragmented, financing space, how to connect the dots, so that they know where to go at what point. And it's great to have now the EIC in the family of financing instruments, because that is such a crucial financing source for many of these companies. We also will continue to provide these market studies and get a much better grip around the points that were actually raised by the various panelists, to ensure that the EIB group remains future oriented and future proof in its own investment approaches. And here I think indeed what we still need to perhaps do better is translate some of the ethical and other issues translate the trustworthy AI principles into our investment guidelines. So advisory will have an important role, but let me get into the financing. We have the early stage, we have some very interesting pilot initiatives that the EIF has started with their Innofin pilot initiative, the 100 million, which has been quite successful. And our study very much shows, and I think Jean-David also mentioned, and everybody else, there needs to be more money. We need to give, certainly from an EIB group perspective and the EIF perspective, there needs to be more financing going into these funds, so that these funds are bigger, so that they can actually give these bigger ticket sizes. The co-investment that then also has been piloted by the European Investment Bank, again, plays a very important role, because the study showed that there is also a need to really scale up to I think Haji's and other panelists' points. We don't want these European companies to start in Europe and then end up elsewhere and lose them. So we need to have that, and we need to have more of it. And I hope that certainly under InvestEU, there will be that quantum of financing coming their way. Now, looking, however, at then the latest, do I have still 1 minute, or do you want me to?
Yes, 30 seconds, Shiva.
30 seconds. Okay, so then making sure that EIB, of course, comes with its full array of instruments along the chain for the industrial companies, for the larger, smaller players with venture debt, but also standard loans, and then the infrastructure needs. And I think this is, we just need to bear that in mind. And I guess I stop here because I mentioned already the importance of, again, the values that need to be associated with our financing in line with the EU principles of trustworthy. So back to you.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Shiva. Jean-David, what are the solutions? Shiva touched upon some of them. What are the solutions that EIC has identified, and what funding initiatives and instruments for artificial intelligence is promoting and planning in the future? Very briefly, if you could take just 1 or 2 minutes for this.
I will try. It's a challenge. It's a challenge. But it's always a pleasure to listen to the passion of Shiva, and so she said already a lot of what is complementing, in fact, EIC, or how EIC can complement the rest. Just focusing maybe on 2 or 3 issues very, very quickly. And I quickly in my first answer identified 2 main gaps. So the first one was this move from lab to companies. And there, I mean, it's very important to do it from the very early stage. I mean, at the moment we are supporting research related or technological development project, because in the past what we did, it's true at EU level, it's true also at national or regional public program, is that we have funded the emergence of knowledge, but we have not provided tools to people that were in project or who could be around project in order to use as soon as possible what is emerging from this project. And this is why we have profoundly modified, not the DNA, but the objective of what we have funded from the last 30 years in the context of the future emerging technology programs, where we have a lot of AI related projects, by the way, in order to accompany, in fact, the promoters of the project, in order to identify the potential use of what they are discovering, which could be used, by the way, in a totally different domain than what they thought initially. And in this context, it's very important to have, in this kind of accompanying to this project, not only the usual administrators that you have within the commission, or that you can find elsewhere, but also people who have a good knowledge of the environment. And this is why we have introduced the program managers in the way we are supporting projects. In the context of the very early stage of the EIC, which is called the Pathfinder projects, but also in the context of the more downstream part, which is the scale-up part. So this is my first point. My second point is that if we want to stay in the race, we have clearly, first of all, to take more risk at the very beginning. I mean, a number of companies that are emerging, I mean, startup or very young SMEs, by definition are still working or developing or maturing their technology and also their positioning on the market. And they are pivoting, I mean, sometimes each 3 weeks. So by definition, we have to change the way we support them. First, by changing the way we support them with grants, and certainly not with regular amendment because the technical annex has been modified because they have pivoted and this kind of thing. So this is first thing. Second thing, by taking indeed more risk and investing directly in this kind of company and not only supporting the VC market, which is, by the way, very important, but with whom we should have another kind of cooperation. Our objective within the EIC, and in particular within the EIC fund that we have incorporated last year, is to invest in this kind of company in the huge case of, in the huge majority of the cases, not alone, but also with VCs, with VC actors. And in the pilots that we launched last year, in which we have identified a bit more than 150 startups, some of them, 14 of them, related in AI-related activities. I mean, in more than 95% of them, we are investing together with other investors. So we are de-risking, in fact, this. And my third point, and I promise I stop, Minerva. My third point is, it was a point that was mentioned a few seconds ago. One of the reasons why also some VCs in Europe are not taking this kind of risk on top of the issue of the size of the fund and these kind of things is also of their, in brackets, non-knowledge of the area. And it's perfectly understandable. I mean, this is their own money at the end of the day. And this is why it's very important to provide also them with what we are calling tech due diligence, not only the usual financial due diligence, but tech due diligence, state of the art, where we are on this. It's not an insurance, but at least it will provide them with additional information in order to take their decision. This is the role of our PM. This is the way we have structured also the IC fund. And this is something that we will continue to expand. I would have a lot of other things to say, Minerva, but I promise I stopped.
Very good. Thank you very much, Jean. I'm looking now to Renaud. Renaud, you have in the audience policymakers and financiers, including myself. Tell us, when designing financial instruments, financial solutions for AI, what do we need to take into consideration in terms of regulation or, mechanism, guidelines, supporting the finance? What is that you suggest that we bring onto the table?
I think the question should be considered throughout the value chain of innovation. And I would say it's at 5 different levels. First one is when funding the fundamental research, as Jean-David was saying, we should always investigate exploitation routes at the very beginning and identify early IP opportunities. It's key to prepare innovation, and it's not always a priority today. So some money should be dedicated to that for when it comes to public funding. The second level is for technology transfer. So we need to favor technology transfer, not only as a way to value research, but also to promote entrepreneurship. The inventions should stay the property of inventors, or at least stay within the startups they create. It's not only a question of licensing, but really a question of ownership and empowering innovators. I've seen so many tech transfer contracts. There are 2 confiscatory right from the beginning, like, okay, I give you 100K and then I take 30% of your just newborn companies. It has to change. The third level is when it comes to go through the valley of death. Just as Elad mentioned, we need enough money and more risk appetite at the very early stage. But at the same time, we need to make sure that certification processes are not innovation killers. And here again, I would mention healthcare. For medtech, for medical device, it might be, I mean, the new certification route is really a pain in Europe, and some innovators are now going for FDA or NMPA certification in China as the first route. So it needs to be changed also here. But also for the valley of death, pre-commercial procurement mechanisms are key, and they should be easily accessible to startups and SMEs without too much administrative burden. The FSTP mechanism under Horizon Europe goes in the right direction with all the cascade funding schemes, but there is a real question of scale and amount available. At the 4 level, it's all about scale up, scale up, scale up. Make sure we have big money available without the barriers of regulation. And here, please understand me, I mean, I'm a strong promoter of trustworthy AI that is safe and favor human well-being. I believe that the ethical and societal issues of AI need to be integrated in the design, the use, and the deployment of AI systems. But this shouldn't be done at the expense of innovation. It's dangerous to regulate everything as a matter of precautionary principle without letting serendipity happen. So be very careful with the unexpected bad things of regulation. And finally, I think that we need to build a unicorn ecosystem. We need AI champions in Europe, and this goes through maybe an easier path to IPO with a strong unified tech marketplace at the European level. That has been like a recurrent questions and issue. But at the same time, it would also require a huge change in the state of mind of big corporations when they consider strategic acquisitions. We need to involve more big end users and give them the incentives to consolidate a sector by either acquiring smaller innovative companies at the right price, so those small companies don't go to be acquired in the US, or we need to help those end users collaborating with startups to build a strong commercial pipeline and to buy products, because in the end, the main funding source is selling products for companies and startups. So I would say that to conclude, really at all those different levels, there are risks and opportunities. It's not only about money, but it's also about promoting entrepreneurship, collaboration between stakeholders.
Thank you very much, Renaud. Nicole, looking at you now, this is something that you do on a daily basis, right? Helping entrepreneurs. How do you see the creation of successful business models around innovation for startups, and what role collaboration plays in this regard in the ecosystems or partnership projects to bring AI from research into practice? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
First tip, come to the AI campus in Berlin that we just opened in April and have a look live. So whenever you're in Berlin, you have an outstanding invitation, contact me on LinkedIn, come visit, we will show it to you. And it's small, we want to grow this, we want it everywhere, we want it to be a network of ecosystems. So we think we need ecosystems and not strategies. We've seen all these AI strategies, from governments, we want AI ecosystems. What is the key concept? It's about collaboration and co-creation. And the AI campus copy-pasted to another thing. I don't want to be an advertising show for me now, but we invite the first GovTech campus hub in Germany will be there. We invite startups that might be in competition even to the ones we incubate. We invite corporates who are working on AI initiatives, who can be clients, who have data, who have problems. We're inviting university spin-offs from the universities in Berlin who are AI relevant. We're inviting investors, and we're creating one place where they can all come, interchange, and get to know each other, It's, I mean, when you go to Silicon Valley, what was the power? Everybody knew each other. You go to 3 bars, everybody knows you have a good developer. I need that guy for the problem I need to solve. So that is the core of this ecosystem, to discover problems, to solve them innovatively, have rapid communication alleys, etc. Let me bring up a second ecosystem component to this. This is, and it goes to Renault's industries that he finds very relevant. And I agree with that. And I would add just environment and sustainability, but otherwise I totally buy into that. Healthcare, smart cities, manufacturing. What structural problems do we have? Manufacturing, we're completely fragmented all over Europe. We have all these small specialized companies, siloed data, great for scalable, big trained AI models. No, it's horrible. So we need to find ecosystems in which we can share this data. I know Gaia X, I have my own opinion on that, another call, probably not good if you're looking at my face. We need to encourage these companies to create big data silos that are not used by Google, that they can monetize and build sustainable business models on. And this means working with your competitors. So this is also challenging for companies. But if you're a regulator, try to make this easier. And there are technical ways to tackle data protection, for example, in the healthcare system, right? If we want to build scalable models on patient data, federated learning, master teacher models, whatever. We need to solve this, but we can solve this. In manufacturing, this is about building these consortia around powerful use cases, and it's the backbone of European economy. So let's really solve this. You see, I'm adamant. So many things. Let's work together on this. There's a lot of great things that have been done. Come visit us in Berlin.
Thank you very much, Nicole. We are just getting closer to the end of the session. Still a couple of questions I would like to pose to Heidi and to Elad. Heidi, you're already working towards this AI democratization, building knowledge and contributing to this computer literacy. You give companies deep learning without hiring AI experts or in-house data scientists. What are your future plans to supporting financing innovation in AI through learning, offering the companies and the startups these skills that they need? Can you give us a little bit of insight on that, please?
So there are kind of two levels that I have a role in there. One is with our company, the other is through the associations and part of the larger ecosystem. So I think Renaud said at the beginning that one of the problems of AI, so to say, is the low adoption. Basically, it's very difficult to implement AI in companies. I think it was the latest Deloitte's research who said that only basically 1/3 of AI projects actually make it, because half of them don't even go from POC into production, and even then another third fail due to lack of production-ready data or integrated development environments and necessary expertise. I mean, AI experts, data scientists are very, very difficult to be found today. They're simply scarce. There's not enough of them. And that creates a problem for companies to actually implement benefits of AI into their own businesses, into their own processes. So we were lucky enough with my company to tackle that problem in a way of creating and building a platform that can be used by non-data scientists as well, such as developers. So we're actually addressing the developers community to simply connect to our platform, connect the data, because they know the technology, they know the business and the domain they're in, and we will handle the heavy lifting, the magic behind the scenes, so to say, so they don't have to go into that domain and don't have to learn new skills or new platforms, new languages. So with that, we are trying to really kind of democratize the use of AI. On the other hand, it was mentioned several times, mentioned by Elad as well, that the VCs are not really understanding the technology as such. Even Jean-David mentioned that there should be some tech due diligence done by others. And yes, that is also one big problem of simply a lot of wider audience not understanding and not being on a level that really can contribute to understanding technology. So that is where education is very important. There I'm part of the Croatian AI Association that is also collaborating with other national AI associations across Europe. And we are doing a number of conferences, events, meetups, promoting the elements of AI course that I think everyone should take especially if they have any connection, even if they don't have any connection with AI, but in order to learn what that technology is and how it can be used. And there's also a bunch of other free courses that are available online, and which is also very, very important because of the upcoming AI regulation, because the draft of AI regulation says that there should be certification, which should be done by a third body, which nobody exactly knows who that is, so who would be doing the risk assessments, who would be doing the certifications, what will be the cost of that for startups. So another entire discussion on making AI as available as possible and fostering innovation in AI. So education is something that has to be tackled on all levels, and dialogue, discussion between all parties.
Thank you so much, Heidi. And just one last point before we wrap up, and maybe we give the chance to the audience to pass on one question. Elad, building on the lessons learned from your experience, what one or two recommendations would you give to European investment bodies such as EIB or EIF when designing these instruments and for the purpose of obviously supporting the SMEs and the startups working into this sector?
So thank you. So I told you I'll suggest answers, and I will. So the problem, I believe, is the current VC ecosystem that needs to change. VCs will be first to tell you, established VCs will be the first to tell you they don't know AI at the pre-seed seed stages. And I don't think you can, Jean-David, you can help them by providing external due diligence, tech due diligence. Investors, you need investors that can do the due diligence in-house. And this cannot be done by existing VCs. You need to deploy more money. It's true, a lot more money is needed, but also a lot more that money needs to go to new VCs and to new players that are VCs that are started by ex-founders, by computer scientists. But right now I can't send my former colleagues, my computer scientist professors who became founded successful startups, I can't send them to raise money because they can't, because all the money is going to the older players and to large VCs that deploy to large startups in later rounds and try to make a theater as if they're deploying in earlier rounds, but they don't do it very well. So money needs to go to very small VCs, micro VCs, right, under 100 million. It needs to go to new players, and it needs to be done with by entities that understand what that entails and how to deploy to this kind of new players. And with, I wouldn't say less red tape, but different red tape. Maybe, I mean, we pass these funnels, right? But I wouldn't send my colleagues to do the same thing. It's just too hard, too risky. And the problem, I think, is incentives in the asset allocators. So when states, when governments, when the EU itself allocates capital, it does so based on the old rules. It doesn't do that aiming so the people deploying the funds don't have the right incentive structure to invest in new VCs starting that are started by experts. And that's a shame, because if the EU just deployed 5 million euros to 100 different VCs that look credible without the red tape, just deploy 5 million to each of 100 credible looking computer scientists, VCs, started VCs that are deploying at the pre-seed and seed stages, then I think hundreds of billions of euros will be created and Europe could win this, because as we said, the only problem, the founders exist, the only problem is the VC ecosystem itself. And I think that the VCs I talk to that are more established will tell you the exact same thing. Deploy more ruthlessly with less red tape to earlier VCs that are really, really small and are willing to take large risks. And the incentive system for doing that needs to be throughout the asset allocating chain.
Thank you so much, Elad. Whoa, so there's plenty that we've been discussing, lots of takeaways, at least on my side, a very encouraging message. At the same time, we touched upon that financing needs to be adjusted to the demand of these science-based ventures. We touched upon capacitation and ecosystem development. Not everything is just about financing and putting financing in the market, but accompanying this with capacitation, advisory service to help the market take off. We talk about democratization, monetization of business models, understand, speak the language. We talked about literacy, building and helping the ecosystem read, understand the literacy of AI. And we talked about, adapting the financial schemes to this type of technologies. I think that we do not have any more questions. We are running by 1 minute out of time, but I'm being told that we will be answering the audience questions offline. So please do not be discouraged to ask panelists any questions. We will take them back to you in the course of the next few days. I want to send a big thank you to all the panelists for these incredible, valuable contributions. A lot of ideas have been put on the table. Thanks for your presence, for enlightening us and giving us some very valuable insight. So big warm thanks also to the audience and to you all. See you soon and see you around.